Speak of the devil, and it shall appear.
We're not here because we're free. We're here because we're not free. There's no escaping reason, no denying purpose, because as we both know, without purpose, we would not exist.
Gee, Frank, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
My God, it would be beautiful.
This is the World Magic Movement. Tonight's episode, Hell's Vatican.
My name is S. Rob, and I am talking to Saul Ravencraft. Hello, Saul.
Hello, Rob. I am amazed that we were able to connect today. We are really pushing technology. I am actually speaking to you from the woods of McDade, Texas, where I am participating in a very bizarre American ritual called a Renaissance Festival.
So let me get this right. You're in the woods.
I am in the woods, but I've got
you are in the
on
woods.
my phone, so I may not have the best connection,
okay,
but we're able to reach. Isn't that wonderful?
It is wonderful, isn't it? Yeah. So to Ren Fair, what are these things? Because we don't have them in the UK, and a lot of people won't know what they are.
We don't need them in the UK because you're surrounded by all that stuff.
Well, you know, it sounds fun, though, doesn't it?
Your medieval culture is still there. It's just a chemist's now. But in the United States, these started in California during the 60s, early 70s, you know, born out of the hippie era, where people were, you know, reconnecting with the earth, reconnecting with their roots. New Age, you know, was evolving. People were getting into Wicca and that sort of thing. And a lot of the culture that underlied that, something that just really seemed to be inspiring people, was that age of chivalry and the age of the Renaissance. I know historically there's two different ages, but we tend to kind of mash them up a little bit. But, you know, the age of lords and ladies and manners and swords and that kind of thing. And California evolved this idea of what they call the Renaissance Festival, where people dressed up and you know, somewhere between 12th and 16th century clothing, and enjoy the acoustic music and try to recreate a sort of Shakespearean feeling. And they become popular. The one I'm participating in is called Sherwood Forest Fair, which has a little bit of Robin Hood and King Richard going on. They have jousting that occurs. Some of it is sort of theatrical demonstrations. But a couple of times a year, guys who actually participate in competitive jousting come and try to knock each other off of horses. And it's glorious. Now, I haven't really gotten to see any of what's going on because I'm working with a show based on the Merlin legend.
Do you know?
I help out as a writer and a puppeteer and general support from Merlin the Wise. And it's been a good year for us. And this year, I'm, for the very first time, taking the paranormal entertainment that I do and actually trying to do that in this space. I've got a little stage, and I've got a couple of times during the day. And I had no idea whether it could even be done here, whether the veil of need would be too much for mental connection, or whether the spirits would be distracted by the little outfits. But we've actually made some legitimate connections, and the people that sit down to partake have really gotten into it and really participated fully. And I'm not doing silly jokes or anything like that. I'm doing what I do. Yeah. And it's been very gratifying to see who will connect and what connections we made. A few of the connections we made have been very profound.
Yeah, good. You know, I think it's interesting there. I've actually seen some of that stuff, but in different combinations. I actually went to something, it was in Durham, it was just happened to be there, and they had these people with, you know, the hurdy-gurdy is. There's like, not the hurdy-gurdy, the music box that you turn the handle, the one where you turn the handle called the wheel fiddle, and he was playing this, and they were in costume, and they had these little tents, so quite similar, and they had these people doing these dances and things like this, so I've seen that. But I've seen people do the jousting, but it was at a fete, or a fair you could describe it as, but it wasn't about that. It was just, the jousting was the show, but it wasn't all put together. So I've seen people do the little individual bits, but I've never seen them put it together into a Ren Fair. Isn't that interesting? It was always just a little group of people decide to do something, or a couple of guys, you know. The nearest we get over here is sometimes in some of the Roman sites. There's some guys go around dressed up as Roman soldiers, and they go around. They always sleep overnight in the tents. And that's part of the reason why some of these sites will say, oh, and we saw the Roman soldiers walking around with the swords. It's actually the guys that do these things that go around. I think they do them for free, the volunteers, but they always get drunk the night before. You see, because their reason that the Roman soldiers were tough. So what people don't realise is they're normally sitting in these tents or getting drunk, and really, really drunk. I mean really, really, really drunk, as in an ambulance had to be phoned once for one person because he was so drunk. They were worried about him, and they get drunk on Newcastle brown ale, and they drink so much, and then the next day, of course, they've got to be early and they've got a hangover, you know, which is why you may get the impression that the Roman soldiers weren't sterling stock, because, you know, they are really drunk by that point. You know, they say it keeps the cold out, you know. But, yes, I've seen it in a similar thing in bits, but not put together, which is interesting, isn't it? You know, we never got that far as to put it together. We like the bits.
The Renaissance Festival is actually a sort of an industry in the United States. There are fairs all over the country. They're staggered throughout the year. Some of the people that are dedicated to this lifestyle will travel from fair to fair to fair around the country, you know, camping in tents or generally in some kind of a little trailer, and you know, living the sort of vagabond lifestyle.
Yeah, I can see that would be good as well, because we being such a big country, it provide a great circuit for people. You could go around there the rest of your life if you wanted to, I dare say, you know, at least in season.
Well, most of the people come are generally looking for beer and turkey legs.
Always a good combination.
And as we know, King Henry never ate a turkey leg.
Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah. Exactly, yeah.
It hadn't been discovered yet.
No, he didn't, no. But to be fair, how many of the things in the history books can we actually say are true anyway, really? You know?
Yeah.
It's just best guess. That's all it is, you know?
But it is a fun escapist kind of an area, and I think that's what I've enjoyed is to connect with these people who have been interested in escaping. A couple of the games that I play when I do my paranormal entertainment, I call everything I do games, because even though I am trying to make real connections, I don't want this to be some sort of a serious laboratory demonstration or anything like that. People can't open up until they're relaxed and you know, in a good mode for that. There's actually a study that was done where they were examining like seance phenomena, and they found that they couldn't really get anything to happen in a lab, and they decided that part of what was going on there was possibly that everyone was just too uptight, and that the conditions were too uptight. Everything was closed. And so they started doing it a little differently. They started throwing these little parties. And they would invite people to these parties. In the middle of the party, they'd say, hey, let's do something. And they would engage in table tipping or other kinds of activities like that. And stuff would happen. And they would record it. They would study it. But they acknowledge the idea that a certain level of openness was required. And so that's why I refer to these games. But, you know, a couple of the games that we played with, we were focused on vibration, connecting to objects, tried to connect with the energy of objects that people carried with them, and connect the objects back with the people they belong to, with pretty good success. And one of the things that I'm doing here that I haven't done very often, but it's been especially effective here, is trying to connect with what I call echo energy. having someone focus on someone who has crossed over, and identifying that energy in the midst of people thinking about someone who's living. And we've had a couple of profound connections there, because I do ask people to think about someone that it won't upset you to think about, someone that you honor their memory, and it's good to think about them. But we make that connection, and we find that person's name. People can't help but be overwhelmed by that, and that can be a strong moment when that connection happens.
Yeah.
And I've done a few messages, which again is not something I normally get to do. No time for that at the Museum of the Weird. But my last stage time here at Sherwood, I don't have anyone on the other side of me, so I get to indulge myself a little bit more at the time. And so we've gone into some old school stuff there. Although most of the things I'm working with really came out more in the 19th century when people started connecting to it and opening to it. But at least using the techniques that I connect with, but I don't care. To me, it's about the connection, and it's wonderful to do that. I mean, I don't want to come out with entrails just to prove I'm doing this in the appropriate medieval style. Nobody wants to see that.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, what I was thinking of, Saul, I was wondering, because at the time there was a jester seemed to do everything, and I was thinking, wait a minute, how do we know that jesters weren't doing this type of stuff? So we look, they did everything, right? Basically, they seemed to draw on anything at all. Music, juggling, magic, everything. So you think about it, could there have been a jester that did this, even if he did it as a serious part? Because you think about it, you really only laugh the most when you've got parts of seriousness. Do you know what I mean? It tends that you notice it more. And you think, well, actually, there probably was a guy, because I've got a feeling our definition of a jester is completely different to the medieval definition. I've got a feeling it's so different that people, if they saw an actual medieval jester, people would go, Jesus Christ, they'd say, this is offensive, you can't do this. And, people would be outraged because it would be completely different to how they think it is. We've fleshed out this guy who looks a certain way, therefore, this is what he is. He's like a clown. And I'm thinking, well, I've got a feeling there weren't always clowns. It just, that there was probably different types. People do their own stuff.
Well, and if you dig into the history of clowning and gestures and that sort of thing, the time that time the church was so strong in its influence over everything that happened that a lot of what we are very open to today was very, very repressed and very, very secretive. People did it, but it had to be couched in all sorts of obscurity, and it's very difficult to get hold. I mean, with your occult studies, you've noticed that the 19th century we can find all kind of stuff. You start going further back and get in the 16th and such. You got some stuff by John Dee and some of that, but it's all very obscure and weird. And the further back you go, the more it seems to just sort of disappear. And I think it was not the sort of thing that was recorded and was acknowledged. People who had control of language, people who had control over recorded history were the church. And so they got to control the agenda. They got to decide what existed and what didn't, as far as we're concerned. Because whatever they didn't write down goes away. And the jester in that time, his role, he had permission, with a certain degree of wisdom. It had to be done appropriately, but he had permission to push against the boundaries of what was acceptable. And because he was the jester, because he was the fool, even though he might be presenting levels of truth, there was plausible deniability there. And so I think that there is absolutely no doubt that there were people engaged in that role of jester that were able to connect with more profound things and quietly in secret would engage in things like divination and other sorts of things. But there were the wise women around, but it was all on the down low, as it were.
Yeah. Well, I believe, I always did, that scrying, certainly in England and Britain generally, went, until recently, it was something everybody could do. Because I remember noticing my grandmother taught me scrying using, tea leaf reading, tasseography, but also with fire. And I realised straight away that basically, at one time, everybody had a coal fire. And if you look back, like even the 19th century, you go back there, which isn't that far, everybody knew how to do this. And if you go back further, people mentioned scrying, and I think it was something everybody knew how to do because everybody had a fire. And that was what I think it came down to. And then they went to tea. And then once the tea went to tea bags, people just lost it. And that's what it is. It's not something that people have lost a lot of generations ago. It's something that was just a normal thing that people didn't write down. Because if you look, there's not that many books on a lot of subjects a long way back. There's probably not a really old ventriloquist book. It's probably gets mentioned in Scott's Discoveries of Witchcraft. There's probably not a book that goes back 1,000 years, It just seems that with far less books and far less literacy, that, it was all oral tradition, really, that's what things were. And, people just lived their lives, Most people's life isn't dictated by writing stuff down.
There's also a good deal of misunderstanding that occurs. You may have seen things that talked about ventriloquism, but their context, their language, their perspective, their connections are so different from how we do it today that we may not recognize that that's what they were talking about.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. I mean, if I used the word belly prophet, you would not be thinking ventriloquist. And that was basically a type of it, where they used to use ventriloquism to give the impression, or normally people say an impression that, say, a statue is talking. Although it's perfectly possible that what they're doing is using it as a form of channeling. So they're channeling it and using the ventriloquist skill so that people understand that what they're channeling is coming from that deity or that entity. But you don't think ventriloquist equals belly prophet, but it really does.
Sure. Well, and it's interesting because when you tied channeling with this sort of what I think today we would think of as trickery. Yeah. And going back to what I was talking about with that kind of party atmosphere, opening yourself up, creating a fun situation where phenomena occur, where you're open enough for it to occur. There are absolutely people that use technique to just deceive people and totally for their own gain. Those people exist. There are con people, unscrupulous, and nothing is sacred for them. Whatever makes the buck. But I think there's also a certain level of this sort of, if we can use the word trickery, that puts people into a context where they open, right? Yeah. If I just talk, you'll never believe that I'm getting the information because channeling is stupid. You're just making that up. But if the statue says it, okay, I'll listen to the statue. And I wonder if sometimes people don't need a certain level of the fantastic so that they can be open to what it is that they're being given, because otherwise they won't accept it. Yeah. But you add a little glitter, if you will, and suddenly that becomes something they can tune into. There's no difference in the information, no difference from the source. It's just that one of them seems to engage us more directly. So to me, it makes perfect sense that someone could both be channeling something divine and using ventriloquism to make the statue talk, and that those don't cancel each other out. Yeah. No, it's a bit like, I believe, like the idea of using trickery or special effects within a ritual. I actually feel,
I don't put escapology in that category. I feel occult escapology, you know, you've got handcuffs, you're getting out of them, you know, obviously there's no trick there. But I do feel that actually, instead of what people seem to feel you need to do, what most magicians do, they feel that, although I don't think any people are actually doing it, but people are talking about it, that if we do this, we have to hide it so you can't tell. And I think it's actually the reverse. I think you have to make it obvious so people can tell. You know, so you can use it within it, and people say, no, that's okay, that's a trick, and this part isn't. Do you know what I mean? The whole idea that you do it like that instead of the way it's people normally think of doing it, rather than say, no, we'll make it obvious. It's like when I've done it within video occultism from time to time as a special effect, which I did because basically video occultism is an area I invented whereby through the playing of a video with intent, occultism is done. And early on I realised that all you've got is like a static camera. So I thought, well, I need something there. So I started off, and in some things I did use some tricks. And I told people these are special effects, but I didn't hide it. And that, as I think, is the difference. They seem to think, well, we'll hide this, and then, you know, people won't know. Where I actually feel that, you know, it's the reverse. You need people to know. If people to know that and say, okay, so that's the special effect to empower it, to help it empower it and make it a bit more visual. And then the real magic is what happens in my life. You know?
Sure. When I talk to people about different levels of manifesting, you know, one of the ideas that I try to get across is ultimately when we're really manifesting, we don't need the sigils, we don't need the circles, we don't need the magic shoes, right? We just manifest. We just reach out, we connect with the universe, and stuff happens. That's the highest level that you achieve, where you just do God stuff.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I think that's basically the main major mission of most of my books, is to do that. Because basically, like, you know, when I started off, everybody was doing the circles and the this and the magic wands and all, which there was still a lot of people doing that. And so I started straight away, and I thought, if I write like that, none of the people are going to do the things in the books. So I did it in a pared down fashion. There was basically nothing there. And then I built it up a little bit. But basically speaking, as you said, you know, to be honest, you seem very influenced by the writing I've done and the work we've done together, because there's still people who are occultists that don't get that it isn't about all the magic stuff. If you add stuff in to add empowerment, it's fine if you want to put it in. But you don't actually need it, you know. It's about will, intent, you know. That's what it's really about. You know, keep it simple. Yeah.
Well, and there, I think there are some days, especially when you're trying to do work for self-improvement. I mean, you need self-improvement for a reason, right?
Yeah.
If everything was fine, you wouldn't need the self-improvement. It's harder for you to bring yourself into that. It's harder for you to accept that you have that ability to manifest. And on those days,
but it's also variation as well, you know.
If the magic shoes help, they do.
Yeah. Exactly.
But you don't need them.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think sometimes things help people because, as you say, some people are very visual thinkers. Some people just can't accept that they don't need these things. But I think sometimes it's just fun for people to do something another way. Do you know what I mean? Because once you remove all these tools and things, you realise that you can basically do it how you want to. You can add things in that make sense, you know, because in many ways, we'll see, and if we produce an egg, it makes a lot more sense than most of the stuff that's already in, you know, that's already used in occult rituals. They don't really make much sense, a lot of these things. They just seem to make sense because they've always been, or they've been there a while, you know. When they move, you can add stuff in that makes sense again, you know, or not, as the case may be, you know. Like a simple talisman is a bottle, you know, you put stuff in it.
And stars and stones, if connecting with the occult, if manifesting things in the universe can't be fun, what is the point?
Exactly, yeah. You know what it is?
What else are you going to do?
Exactly, yeah. Because you know what it is? Yeah, you're right. Do you know what it is? Because occultists are, and especially the ones that write books and the ones that do videos, are afraid to look silly. They're afraid to look silly, so they basically end up rewriting each other's books, sometimes 1,000-year-old books, or a couple of 100-year-old books, and they're rewriting them and rewriting a lot, not all of them, but a lot of them do, and they're afraid of looking silly. They're afraid if they do something new, people will think, you know, like, look at him, he looks silly. And I mean, some of these people, Saul, they obviously got these images which aren't really them, which is fine, okay? But it's hard to keep up with for an author, to keep up a 24-hour-a-day image without it becoming you, even if it wasn't to start off with. But it's just the way they do it. They are really scared of looking silly. But if you want to progress a subject, you have to take chances. There's no other way of doing it. You've got to take chances. You've got to put yourself on the line, you know?
Well, sex makes you look silly, and who wants to give that up?
Exactly.
So that's why I'm here in the woods, is basically taking exactly everything that you're talking about, bringing it into a different context. It's expanding me a little bit, and I do enjoy these people. They're delightful people. Many of them have completely devoted themselves to this lifestyle of disconnecting with the mainstream and living in a universe somewhat of their own creation. And you know, a lot of them aren't wealthy, but they don't seem to need it.
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely fabulous. And I've been talking to Saul Ravencraft.
Thank you, Esther. Hello, this is Saul Ravencraft. I'm talking to S. Rob. Hello, Rob.
Hello, Saul.
All right, so you send me these messages from time to time about the things that you want to share, the things you want to explore. And every once in a while you use words that don't feel like they go together. And I always look forward to what you're going to share, but I never know what to expect. So you sent me something that said the Vatican into hell, or Hell's Vatican.
That's right, yeah. I actually came up with this quite recently. In fact, it's funny actually, because a while ago, a long time ago, when people were going on about this fake news stuff, and I actually could see that some of this stuff was surrealism. So I thought, you know, so I came up with something called the We Avant News. Hey, the news nobody else knows. And it was just this really stupid thing I did. And it was things like, you know, outer space graduates first human student and things like this, you know. And, you know, like, you know, potato boy and stuff like it, just anything, you know. And one of the things I came up with, which I thought that would make a decent story, which because it sounded so bizarre, was Vatican vaults, you know, the gateway to hell. They dug too far, you know, when they were making Rome and all this sort of thing, you know, early on. So they put the Vatican on this, and it seemed so obviously wrong at the time that it was really funny. And it wasn't until a friend of mine it wasn't about that at all. We talked about something else, and he was on about an organisation called the 99. And all really occultists know about this, but don't you think about it. And in the past, there was a guy who was hounded and hunted down for talking about it. And basically, it's an organisation in the Vatican that where you've got people who are swearing a blood oath to a demon. Now, first of all, people think, oh, this is wrong, it's some mad conspiracy theory. It does exist, okay? You're probably going to have time proving it, a difficult time proving it, but all of your occultists above a certain level will have heard of it in some form or other, you know? A lot of people will have done online. But for some strange reason, when he said it, I worked it all out. It came straight, I thought, of course, that's what it is. Because it may seem a bit strange that the Vatican, you know, the centre of the Roman Catholic Church is in actually Rome when you think about it, when Catholicism really seemed to come from Jerusalem. But that's where it is anyway. And in actual fact, some types of voodoo, you know, Kimbanda voodoo, class the Vatican as an evil place. And the reason they do is because they look at it, that you're making Jesus real, you're making him solid. Now, it's not anything to do with that. Okay, it's simply to do with the fact that I thought you've got the Vatican there and you've got a chair within the Vatican for the devil to sit. Now, I always thought that was odd. I thought, You know, they're going to have some sort of discourse between the two, but, you know, how does it work the other way around? You know, that was what I was thinking. And I put it together. I thought, well, what you've got is you've got a Vatican on earth. So there's your Vatican on earth, and you've got the chair for the devil to come and sit if he wants to talk to anybody. So when they say the devil comes into the Vatican, he's probably been in many times because he has a chair. You don't put a chair for a person who doesn't come anywhere, you know what I mean? You know, if I said to you, I'm going to come to your house in 10 years' time, you don't buy me a chair, an individual chair, and put my name on it and leave it there. You don't, do you? It's a very weird thing to do. You just don't do that. But when you add in that the 99, probably got a different name now, which is 99 people, there probably are occultists, but there'll also be, you know, bishops and things like this, and they make a blood oath to a demon. Now, the thing is, that's a demon. That's not a devil. A devil is a fallen angel. So the demon, in many ways, is like the equivalent of us. You know, if God is higher than us, then, you know, and the angels are higher, we're further down, then that means that the devils are basically, you know, you're talking the same thing, the devil, they're the sort of the angelic class, and the demons, the mainly demonic, they're like us humans. So obviously that's what I thought. I thought, so that demon they're swearing a blood oath to is their pope. And then I thought, now it makes sense. What you've got is a Vatican on earth with our pope, and you've got a Vatican in hell. And what you've got is, some of these people in the Vatican on earth have to swear a blood oath to a demon who is the pope in hell. Now that also means that some of these demons in hell swear an oath to our pope. At first you think, people will be thinking, why would you do this? But if you think about it, we need free will. You know? The whole thing of Christianity and a lot of the thing about good versus evil is based on the idea of free will, which means if we win, if the forces of good win, we lose free will. You know? Now, if you think about it, if the forces of evil win, the demons probably lose as well, because if they're the equivalent of us, then that means they've got, you know, some choice somewhere. They lose what they've got. Would they even be needed anymore? You know, there's no win here. The only way it wins, the only things keep on going and we get to win, is if you've got good and evil. So, of course, what you've got is two Vaticans cooperating together. So you've got, you know, your one on earth and your one in hell, and a continual communication between the two, which means, you know, if you're working from the principle that, you know, that Lucifer isn't Jesus, as some people say, then you've got to have another seat in hell for God to come. So you've got this continual communication all the time. You've got this, you know, between the two. So you're not talking a situation where, you know, we control all the good and that's it. You've actually got communication together. It means the Pope has to manage the good and the evil, and so does the Pope in hell.
Where officially there's some animosity there, but there's also some level
exactly,
of...
it does, doesn't it? You know, but it's like a continual
not
communication.
Collusion exactly, but contact. There's things are working at different levels. One is sort of the public level, and then there's another reality underneath that surface.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big... Yeah, I mean, it is a big conspiracy, really. And when you think about it, it's the only way it makes sense. You know, religion doesn't really make sense without that. It doesn't. The other way, you're really fighting to lose. You can't win by winning. You know, if either side wins, we lose. So it doesn't make any sense that way. You know, the only way it makes sense is if you cooperate. Which makes you wonder why the Pope hasn't cooperated in a different way. Because if I was the Pope, Saul, if you look in Christianity, you know, the most important sins are the deadly sins. Things like, you know, things like pride, the sin of pride and envy and things like this. What I would do, Saul, is I would say, okay, we will increase the pride and envy and all this stuff on the world, but we want no murder. You know, the murder, all the nasty, violent crimes, they're gone. They don't exist. But you can have all the envy, sloth and all that stuff you want, but we'll take the murder away. You know, I would have done that deal. That's what I would try to do a deal with. You know. But maybe he's thinking it would tip the balance.
Sure. I guess one of the places my head goes as I try to wrap my head around what you're saying is, okay, just from all the conspiracies I grew up on, right? I can see where the devil having a seat in the Vatican makes some sense because okay, the Vatican appears to be doing some good, but actually they're doing this. There's a little they got a little bit of skin in the sin game here, and so they are in collaboration with the enemy to make sure that they still got a product to sell. But what would the Jesus seat in Hell's Vatican? What does that do for hell?
I would imagine that what you're actually talking about is what it does for the Vatican in hell, that Vatican. And I think that would just be a matter of balance. If he comes to oversee, that there, then he has to come to hell, and he will have to therefore negotiate the punishment. Because if you think about it, everyone doesn't get the same punishment in hell. If you die and you go to hell, you get punished. It's not the same for everyone. So instead of saying, this guy stole a magazine, he must go next to the murderers, and they say, no, he doesn't go next to the murderers. He has to go next to the magazine stealers. He has to go over there, so he gets a slight punishment. And this person might not have done much of anything, maybe nothing wrong at all, but he hasn't really done any good. We'll put him somewhere where the food's a bit crappy, but he'll be okay. So there's balance there.
So it's the rats and the rat catchers collaborating to keep each other in business.
Yeah, and keep everything balanced. It's actually in the book called Magick, Hell's Vatican, and that's the second Magick book. It was actually written with a technical advisor, although for some reason I think Amazon put him down as author, although on the cover you can see he's a technical advisor, because the Magick book is about a hitman. And it's actually quite funny because it's got, you've got the Pope swearing and things like this, and he, but he doesn't swear in front of other people. It's a very funny book. But it's actually got plans and things in there. So within the Magick book, there is, and both the books actually, both the Magick books, there is actually a weapon that he makes. Both books, different weapons. And it's not just, because you see in the UK we can't test stuff out. I can't say, oh, I'm going to do this weapon and test it. We can't do that. So, got a technical advisor called Magick, and he actually has designed weapons and things like this. So the stuff in there is actually real. So in that Magick book, you've got a slight redesign, partly him and partly me, of a type of catapult. But it's not the catapult you're probably thinking of. It's actually a type that can penetrate the human body with a small ball bearing. It can also fire an arrow. It tells you how to make the arrowhead from a key, and that's part of the book as well. So it draws on reality, it's not purely fantasy. And that's the funny thing there, is that although it's a funny book, and I think people will start to buy a lot of these as they go on, it actually draws on a lot of real stuff there, and that's what's funny about it, because a lot of these books, they really don't, they're frightened to put anything real in. But, the weapon in there is real, and it's a variation called a flip cat, and it's been redesigned a bit. And like I said, it can send a ball going at 500 feet per second, and apparently you need 200 feet per second to penetrate the body. Obviously, if you fire an arrow from it, that's going to kill. And it's all set out. The guy isn't like a James Bond character. He doesn't mix when he doesn't have to. He does his surveillance and stuff like this. Although it is funny, he doesn't mix in the way that James Bond does, where he's always mixing with people, because he could make mistakes that way. So, and in that book, he has to go into, first he has to fight this other person, and then he has got to go into Hell's Vatican. He's got to do that, and that's called Magick, Hell's Vatican. The first Magick book was actually called Magick Murderer for Hire. And that one's got a gun design in it, which was Apparently nobody knew what the Russian KGB 3-shot assassination pistol was. So this guy, another guy in Brazil, designed one. Obviously you can't test them over here, I can't do that, but I can put out a book with it in. And that was the first Mac Hit book, called Mac Hit Murderer for Hire. And it's got like the things in there and how you make it, you know. Because you know what, Sol, I didn't want to get into that thing where you're doing this sort of crime fiction where none of the stuff actually works, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Where someone's dying of a flying carrot, and I think I don't want to go there, really, because it gets a bit ridiculous. And to be honest, it's not a lot of detail. The details are there, but there's not a lot. It's just within the context of the story. But I didn't want to get into the stuff where, you know, where you're looking, you think this isn't right, you know, you wouldn't die like that. And the thing is, it's not conventional crime fiction, because it's not about the guy getting caught. It's about him not getting caught, you know. He's a professional hitman. He turns up, you know, he does his kill, he does what he needs to do, and he wins, you know, he gets it, and that's it.
Well, any number of authors have discovered that it's a lot easier to get truths in front of people if you couch it in fiction.
Yeah. Well, I think, to be honest, it's a matter of they can't really separate the two completely. If you're trying to write something which was all fiction, all the details would have to be wrong. That means you couldn't have a car because cars exist, you know what I'm saying? You get into such a mess that some of it has to be real. But to be honest, I thought some people might buy it for the gun designs. I don't think so. But you need that reality there, something that has that touch of reality. Because the way I think of it this, Saul, right? If somebody decides to make one of these gun things and they blow their hands off, it's not my fault if their you know, skills aren't good enough. It's as simple as that. You know, the designs are being used. I can't use them. I couldn't even fire them, to be honest, and it wouldn't even be legal if I could. But they have been fired, they've been tested and all that. But the way I look at it is it helps to give it a centre of reality. You know, because you've got to remember, I live in a culture where there's no weapons, really, as such. You know, you don't really even see knives. People aren't even allowed to carry key rings with bits on them. They're really not. So how do you couch it in reality? How do you give it that reality around it? Because it's just not there, you know. Most kills in Britain are made with blunt instruments, you know, still. Like what they can get a hold of, bats and stuff like this. There's just not there. There's nothing to look at. So you've really got to draw on, you know, drawing on a friendship and someone else to help me with that. Helps to make the books real, you know. It helps to add reality to it.
Sure. Sure. Well, and if you wrote something that was completely unrelatable, no one would read it.
Exactly, yeah.
It'd be too weird.
It would, yeah, exactly, yeah. But, you know, it also helps to get the other elements as well, because the guy actually, you know, does wear Kevlar when he walks. He wears his bulletproof vest, the guy who's the technical advisor. You know, he wears a bulletproof vest all the time, you know. You know, he's in Brazil. All the cars in Brazil are bulletproof. You don't buy a car in Brazil that isn't bulletproof. So it helps to give it some reality. So, you know, but to the same extent, I tend to draw on, obviously, my own experience as well. But when you put them together, you get something interesting, because it helps you, them details as well, you know, because the guy drives around a bulletproof car. And he has, you know, his Kevlar on and his weapons and stuff like that, because it's Brazil. You just couldn't walk around without that on. You'd die, you know, in most areas of Brazil if you walk around like I do, you know. So it helps to add that reality. Although, funny enough, I didn't base it in any country. So, in the first book, Mac Hit Murderer for Hire, I didn't place him in any actual place. I did know he wasn't of the place where he was, and he was coming to Britain in that one, but I didn't say he was from Britain. Nobody really knows where he's from, and his name, Mac Hit, M-A-C, Hit, isn't his actual name. That's not his born name. And it explains in the first book how he got that name, you know. So nobody really knows anything about him, you know, which helps with what he does, you know. And I thought that's a good point. If I don't base it and I don't mention an actual place, everyone can imagine it's their place. You know what I mean? You know, you can imagine him as you, or in your place. You can imagine that he lives where you live and he's travelling to England. Or I can imagine, like I'm talking about the first one, I can imagine that he's English and they don't know and he's travelling to England. You know, You know, you can all imagine that he is whoever you want him to be. He comes from wherever you want him to come from. You know, you can project a little, and that's a good thing as well. You know.
Well, and Ian Fleming, it's interesting with the James Bond character. Ian Fleming provided remarkable little detail about the nature of James Bond.
Yeah.
He doesn't give you much description. He doesn't give you a whole lot about him. He's just what he does and how he does it. Yeah. Yeah. And the movie franchise sort of created this whole vision around what James Bond was supposed to be, but Fleming really left him very shadowy.
Yeah. Well, what I did, I thought, if I was doing that, what would I be like? And I came to the conclusion that I would be a person that would stay out of the way. I'd probably spend a lot of time in the hotel room. I would only talk with people who were linked with it, you know. A lot of the things that they do in James Bond, I thought I wouldn't do that. I would do the reverse. But, you know, it's worked well, you know, for both the books. But I think it's an interesting thing there, isn't it? The fact that could be used, that idea, to get information to places where you wouldn't be able to get it. Because I'm thinking of places where occultism is banned, the countries where it's banned. I thought it'd be interesting to write, you know, books and put, you know, occult bits in, so people can get the book and say, no, this isn't occultism, this is blah, 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 you know. It's an interesting idea.
Well, and you have people like the guy who wrote Red October and that whole series of books. I can't say his name right now, but he was a big researcher, very, very big into research, very interested in military and law enforcement and espionage and all of that sort of thing. And he connected with people. He learned a little bit about how they viewed the world, although they didn't talk about the details. And then he used a lot of public resources to pull information to create that reality. And then he engaged his imagination. And in some of his work, he actually got challenged by CIA saying, someone's been leaking stuff to you because you described our procedures better than anyone should be able to know. And really what he did was he took the pieces, the reality that he had, and he imagined what would be the way to do that. What would you do? How would it work? How would that stuff fit together? And his vibration was so strong with that community that he basically inadvertently extrapolated a lot of truth out of that, to the point that it upset some people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, see, the only other option is to go the old pulp authors trick. I'm sure you've heard of it. Where what they used to do is, they used to try and get, you know, if they were writing these things in these other countries. Obviously, travel then was a lot more difficult. You didn't have the internet. So they used to look for, you know, little pictures of places, or, you know, little postcards. And what they used to do is, once you had your postcards, Saul, what you needed then is you needed a language book. So whichever country it was, you looked your phrases up. And what you did is, you describe the postcards at some point in the thing, in perfect detail, and you may even put the guy in, and you'd have a guy he converses in this foreign language, and in perfect, and you think, oh, they must have been there. You know, he must have been to all these places, this guy, you know. And he's not, because you just described the postcards, so you do it in detail. And, you know, because it feels like you're there, because you've got the picture right there in front of you as you write it. And then, you know, you just drop a language bit in here, maybe another couple of phrases throughout the book from your language book, not big ones, you know. And that...
Well, and we laugh at that from sort of, you know, the sort of pretension that is there. But, you know, going back the other direction, I think it's perfectly reasonable that based on the information that you have, the extrapolations that you have had about the Vatican and hell could be describing truth.
Yeah.
And if you get a postcard and you use that postcard in that language book to try to project yourself to a visit you can't physically make, I think that it is perfectly reasonable that can become a real visit for you.
Yeah.
That we do have that ability. You know, we're talking about using it in ways that are kind of silly, right? Yeah. But if you really wanted to go and make that visit, and it just wasn't physically possible for you, our ability to connect with those things and use our imaginations to extrapolate that, before we know, that ultimately ends up in an actual journey for this place.
Yeah. Well, I actually do believe that Hell's Vatican exists. You know, that's what I think is funny about it, is because if you actually read that book, there's a lot of things I put in there, a lot of stuff which is completely true, but which I realise the average person won't realise reading the book. They'll have not a clue, because it's a funny book. It's sometimes funny. It's because of the nature of the book. No one will realise that the stuff's true. You know, they will just imagine, you know, that it's just humorous stuff. You know. Because it's just one of those things, isn't it? Truth is stranger than fiction, you know. And if you put it in there, you know, you don't have the problem of people saying, "Well, you know, I don't believe it." It's just there, you know. And those who already know, who are already in the know, they will look and say, "Yeah, that's funny because that's real."
I definitely need to read the book. I definitely need to learn more about your vision of the Vatican and hell. This all sounds like a lot of fun, and I hope that people listening to this will connect with that as well, but use it as a springboard to their own manifestations, their own abilities to reach beyond what they personally experience, and to. So, I mean, that's the whole point of these occult exercises and everything like that, is to reach beyond.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, yeah. You know, and the idea that people look at the Vatican in a new light as well. Because this being the case, I know that sometimes they get painted the good guys, but a lot of the time they get painted the bad guys. And now you realise that they're just part of a system. And it's a case of, once you create this system, it's created above and below, you know, on earth and in hell. So that's all it is, you know. It's just a system now, and that means that they're just as much stuck in it as it seems that most of us seem to be stuck in it in some way or other as well.
Thank you for sharing this. This is fascinating stuff. I can't wait to dig a little bit more into it, and I hope that all of our guests will as well. Thank you for talking about this with me.
Okay,
I'm Saul Ravencraft.
And my name is S. Rob. Thanks a lot. This has been the World Magic Movement with S. Rob, Saul Ravencraft, Freddie Valentine. Production design by Mythmade Productions. Produced by S. Rob. Music, A Dark Blue Arc by Pipe Choir. Find them at freemusicarchive.org. This program is licensed for sharing under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share-alike 4.0 International. For more details about usage and sharing, see links in the program description or visit creativecommons.org. This program is licensed by Werevamp Media Limited. See program description for additional links to guest sites and supporting information.